Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. This episode is in response to someone being tasked with leading an innovation session as part of an overall team day. And they really didn't know where to start. And they wanted some tips on how to get people thinking creatively and get them to bring lots of ideas to the table. And then off the back of this, we run a whole workshop in the Career Club to teach you how to do this. And we'll share more about that workshop at the end. But for now, and as usual, let's get stuck in. Jackie, if we need to set up a session like this, where do we start?
The place that we started with this particular situation was asking some of the fundamental questions that you need to answer before you can actually get into designing the session. So I think when people are tasked with designing the session, they often jump to what do I need to include within it and how can I make sure that it's creative and ideas based. Whereas where we started with this was in asking, what is the purpose of the session? What are the outcomes? So effectively, what's the brief that you've been given and getting real clarity on what the expectations are of you as a leader being asked to run this session. And the reason that's so important is if you go back to our podcast episode on how not to have shit meetings, we talked about the framework of purpose, outcomes, and process. So purpose being, why is this session being run? What is actually going on here? What's the reason behind having this session? And then outcomes, what is it that you want to get to by the end of this session that you're being asked to run? What is it that people need to have decided or contributed? How will you, so for example, are you just generating ideas or are you also evaluating ideas? Are you making decisions within the session about which ideas you're going to be using? So really getting clear on the purpose and the specific outcomes will then shape how you might design the process itself.
Yeah, and that makes absolute sense because if you get that bit nailed, then everything else has surely got to be easier. And I think I was just, as you were talking through then, I was just thinking sometimes with these sessions, and I think in this particular situation as well, you don't always know who is going to come to these sessions, and that can really make the creativity and the ideas generation element of that session a little bit more difficult because you've then got to try and figure out what do I need to do to get the best out of these people, and you might not know who they are.
Yeah, that's very often the case. And even if you do know who they are, in this type of session, where, for example, you might have a whole function brought together to, if a common scenario where you're asked to do this is where you've got problem solving or where you've got a business or a functional strategy and you're being asked to facilitate a session that is going to generate ideas as to the how. So the what and the why we're aiming to achieve has already been set. And this session is often there to try and determine more of the how are we actually going to do that. And it often does have that, like you say, slant where you have often quite a big group. You might have quite different levels of experience. You might have different levels of how well you know or how closely you've worked with people. So it could, for example, be if it's an entire function, if you're the head of or the director, you might have your team and then their teams. So people that don't directly report to you or that you don't work with day in, day out. So that can definitely add some complexity, but it can also really make, if you design it, it can also make for a really great session because often those people that you necessarily don't know as well will be the ones that might contribute some great ideas, and you don't have those preconceived thoughts of what to expect, and you can't read somebody's mind. So I think when you're in a session where you're wanting ideas and variety of ideas, then actually some of that can be really helpful to the process.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? As long as you know what you need to get out of that session and the type of things or the type of ideas or the themes of those ideas that you need to generate, then I suppose that's half the battle, isn't it? So what is the next thing then that you would need to think about if you're setting up one of these sessions?
I think particularly with this, think around two things: timing, because when you're asking people to be creative and come up with ideas, the brain is not going to work as well when people feel under a lot of time pressure. If people feel put on the spot, if they feel nervous, if they feel like their idea's got to be a great idea, then they might not speak up, or they might not even be able to come up with ideas if they feel that there's time pressure. And then the other is thinking about how can you make it easier for people's brains to access more of that more creative state. And what I really like to do with some of these is to bring prompts and ways to make it easier for people to do that. Because without that, it can be a bit like an episode of The Apprentice where you just see people sat around flip chart and somebody go, give me all your ideas. That doesn't work. So how do you find an alternative? And I think some of it is about making sure that it doesn't feel rushed, but also it can be about bringing in some prompts and some ways to help people's brains to operate in that more creative space.
Yeah, and I think when you're in those sessions as well, you've always got the different types of people, haven't you? You'll always have those people that will shout louder, and then you'll have those people that are almost frightened to speak up. So I suppose it's like, how do you get everyone involved without kind of extending the meeting longer than it needs to be? How do you make people feel comfortable enough to join in?
For something like this, a really simple and specific way that you can do it, and this is just one example of a facilitation technique, there's loads, but one really simple thing that can work well is to get people to do their thinking individually using some of the prompts before you start discussion and debate. So as an example, if you have got, here's the strategy, what are some of the ideas that we could generate to try and be able to achieve these particular targets? Some of the prompts that you could give to allow people to start that thinking process might be, what's something that we've done before but we don't do now? Or what's something that a competitor does? Or what have you seen done in other industries but not done in ours? And you can go a little bit more wild and wacky with it. So you could go with something that a Swedish person or a French person or a German person would suggest. So you're almost prompting people's brains to a more specific type of thought. But rather than ask people to share those ideas outwardly, you just literally give people a stack of Post-its. You give them a range of different prompts, some of them more conservative and some of them perhaps a little bit more out there. And you just give some time for people to come up with as many different ideas and put one per Post-it as they possibly can.
So I really like that idea with the Post-its, because I think one of the things that I always find in meetings, and I know like when I'm speaking to clients around that and trying to get that engagement and participation in the meetings, if you've got those quieter people that are quiet for whatever reason, and it could be that they're just observing the room, they could just be new, there's a whole range of reasons why they might not be speaking up. So by putting those ideas onto the Post-it notes, that's encouraging them to contribute without kind of putting them on the spot to speak. So would you then ask them to read out those Post-its? Like, how does that work?
So a really nice way to do it is to have different sections. So for example, you might have a flip chart with a couple of the prompts and answers in response to those prompts go on there. Or you could, as the facilitator, gather them in and you could group them. So you might find that there's several very similar ideas. And what you can then do is facilitate discussions around the outputs from those ideas. So you could for example, you could put several different ideas and you could get people in small groups to go to each set of ideas and evaluate those. You could get people to give different ideas, marks out of 10. There's lots of different ways that you can start to facilitate discussion and evaluate the ideas. But the point is that because people haven't had to speak up and because people don't necessarily have to have their name to the idea, you're not evaluating the person. And the idea isn't to point out which ideas are great and which ideas are terrible. It's to provoke further discussion and to build on those initial ideas for, okay, now that we've seen those initial ideas, what discussion can we have that can take those ideas a stage further? Then it builds into a much more collaborative process of creating solutions as opposed to judging people's initial idea.
I really like that. And especially if people are quite junior in the team as well, because then it gives them the opportunity really to get their ideas out, create the discussion around it, and then they can then get involved with the conversation where they're comfortable. So I do really like that way of working. And I think when we're asked to be creative and get people generating ideas, it's so important, isn't it, to get them into that right headspace and to give them different opportunities to contribute in a way that's comfortable to them. And obviously, if you don't know them, that's adding into the difficulties that you have in terms of setting up one of these sessions. So what else can you do then? So once you've got all that in place and you know what you're going to do within the session to bring out that creativity and get people involved, what else can you do?
So one of the things in terms of some of the debrief that I quite like is you can also give people specific lens or a specific role to adopt when they're evaluating ideas. So as an example, you could ask somebody to be devil's advocate. So they're trying to pick a hole in every idea and find the gaps in it and the reasons why it might not work. You can ask somebody else to be, for example, the CFO. So they're financially evaluating each idea and thinking about risk versus reward, level of investment versus potential gain. You can ask someone else to be the customer. So they're evaluating from that customer lens. And you can challenge people to take on roles that they wouldn't normally take on and to see a different way of evaluating ideas that they might not naturally do. And what that can do by having those different roles, you challenge people's thinking. But in addition to that, you get people to, as a group, evaluate ideas through a number of different lenses or approaches. So you end up with quite a different evaluation sometimes of an idea because it's a more rounded one than just people's natural perception. So I think when you're in that situation, what you often find, or what I have experienced with this type of thing, is that, first of all, people that are more junior will perhaps give more creative ideas because they're not in that routine of just doing what they've always done, because they bring a beginner's approach to something. So they can give you ideas that you might not have thought about. But also in that evaluation process, what you can find is that ideas that maybe you would naturally have lent towards might start to lose some of their sheen, and some of the ideas that you might not necessarily have thought would fly gather momentum and gather support. So sometimes with these sessions, that the decisions can get made there and then as to what are we going to buy into, what are we going to commit to, what do people think we should do. Sometimes it's just about generating those ideas and having some of the discussion and then taking it away and decisions are made elsewhere. I really like when you can have that discussion and have people at least party to the decision being made, because I think that way you might not agree with the final decision that's been made, but if you've been party to that whole process and you've seen what other decision is taken and why the decision you wanted wasn't taken and that other decision was, then I think you're much more likely to get buy-in to what has finally been concluded. So yeah, whether you run that decision-making portion or not, then I think the evaluation side of it is really key and helps people to have different perspectives and see things that they might not have otherwise seen.
Yeah, and I think from a development perspective for like your own personal development, like being involved within that situation and being able to stretch your thinking and understand different people's perspectives and then collectively make those decisions. I think there's a lot in that, isn't there? So it's almost like you think that you're just setting up this creative ideas generating session, but what you're actually doing is you're actually helping people develop in many different ways. So I feel like it's quite, a responsible position to be in, but also a real fun and exciting position to be in when you can be that leader that, takes the lead within a session like that and brings out the best in people. And then you can then watch them go on and maybe even use some of the techniques that you've used to run their own meetings going forward.
And what I really like at the conclusion of the meeting is to ask people, what ideas did you come up with that you wouldn't otherwise have come up with if we'd not run the session in this way? Because there's nearly always things that people recognize that in a normal meeting, they wouldn't have come up with that idea. And this session has helped them to take a different view, to make a different decision, or to come up with a different idea. So I really like that, both to help you recognize that people have responded to the session that you've been running, but also to help them to recognize the value in the session for themselves and for having spent their time there. And the feedback, so the person that asked this question that we gave the support to, the feedback from the session that they ran was absolutely fantastic. And they said that they got buy-in for things that they'd wanted to get buy-in before. There were new ideas that came up. I think when you really take the time to think about how you can run it in that more productive way, you get, like you say, a much more fun and exciting session for you to lead as well as for other people to be a part of.
Yeah, and this is something I always think that leaders don't always get training on. I think you're expected to go and be innovative. You're expected to go and set up a session like this quite often, but you never really get any training. Or you might go on a token day where you'll learn how to put a presentation together, or you'll learn how to maybe run a session. But then you go away, you get back to your day job, and you never really get the time to practice it. And then it comes around and you're like, where are my notes? Where do I start? And it's almost like you need to be really intentional with it and really focus on it. And I think that was one of the things that we were talking about within the Career Club workshop when we went through the facilitation skills for leaders, that, this is a framework that you can use, but you then need to go away and practice it and put it into action and make sure that it's an area of focus for you and you are taking up those opportunities when you can. So what else would you say that people need to think about in order to set up a session like this?
So I think we covered a lot of ground in the session that we ran. And the reason that we ran the workshop in Career Club is because we recognized that this was a specific question, but more generally, leaders are asked to run and facilitate all kinds of different sessions. They're asked to do project kickoff meetings. They're asked to do team development days. They're asked to run all sorts of different sessions. And I think probably the biggest thing that I asked people to take away was the sequence that we gave in terms of the approach for people to take when they're facilitating, because without having that in their mind, I think the risk is that you jump from here to here, or you try and emulate something that you've seen that might have worked somewhere else. But if you don't have that understanding of why did that approach work for that situation, you don't know how to adapt it for the situation that you're facilitating within. And I think the other big thing that came up in the discussion alongside that workshop was that situation where leaders are often asked to facilitate sessions that they naturally have a stake in. And so holding those dual roles of being someone who is leading the team making key decisions and therefore has a stake in the outcome of whatever's discussed, whatever's decided, and is potentially the decision maker, with being a facilitator, which in theory is a neutral role where you are encouraging and ensuring that everybody is included, that everybody is able to participate, that everybody can participate in the best way possible. That can be a real challenge for leaders to be able to manage. So I think it's really important when you're running, because you can just kill the vibe in a session if you inadvertently step into that decision-making piece too early, or if you poo-poo an idea that somebody comes up with. People are like, well, what's the point in me sharing my suggestions? You've already decided what you want it to be. And I think we've all been in those meetings.
Do you know what? Just as you're saying that, then I'm just like, yeah, that is something that you see a lot, especially if it's a senior leader running the session. They've already got their own agenda. They're just almost paying lip service, and because you're providing all of the ideas, you're trying to be creative, and they're like you're saying, like poo-pooing the ideas, and it feels like this is a waste of time. So it's good to think, okay, how do I want those people to feel in that session? And it's that all of the contributions are valid. This isn't about making decisions right now. This is about pulling all of those great ideas out. And I think once you help people to feel safe, I think is the right word, isn't it? They need to feel safe in that session to share their ideas, whether they're writing them down or actually physically talking them out. And I think if you can create that space, I think that's where you get that real level of creativity, isn't it? Where people think, I feel safe, I can share. And as you're going through that session and people start hearing other people's ideas, then that gets their brains pinging, doesn't it? So then next minute, it's like, I don't even know where this idea has come from, but it's just come to my mind because maybe it's something someone else has said. This is what I'm thinking now. And you can almost see that energy rise in the room, and sometimes the excitement as well. And that's what I like about facilitating meetings or sessions where you can see that and feel that energy in the room, and people then go away feeling energized and not thinking, that was a waste of time, because they've already made the decision. So I think that's quite important as well, isn't it?
It really is. And one of the fundamentals of psychological safety is for people not to feel judged. And just picking up on what you were describing there, that as a facilitator is one of the pillars, is making sure that you create that psychological safety. And with ideas, it's very easy for people to judge, and for people to judge themselves, or to worry that others will judge their ideas or their suggestions. As a facilitator, that's part of that crucial responsibility, is ensuring that you create a situation that is psychologically safe. And that means that you ensure that you don't inadvertently create judgment of others within that session, because that will shut down the contribution, because it doesn't feel safe for them to contribute if they feel that they're being judged.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make there as well. And I think if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, either I've been in this situation, I was absolutely petrified, or I am going to be in that situation soon, or actually in some cases, I don't know when I'm going to end up in that situation. So maybe this is something that I need to think about and start preparing for and being intentional with. Then let us know. As always, get in touch and give us some feedback and let us know where you're up to. And you are more than welcome to come and join us in Career Club. The link will be in the show notes. And Jackie does some amazing one-to-one coaching sessions around this as well. So get in touch, let us know what you need. We'll let you know what options are available. And as usual, thank you for listening. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favourite podcast platforms. And we will be back next week with another episode.
Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.